Welcome to Sage Circle for Southern Black Girls and Women's Consortium. My name is Joy Webb. I am the Network Engagement Manager, and we are so blessed and honored to have Dr. Nadia Richardson today to talk about mental health. It is imperative that we talk about this, especially in Black communities and Black women and girls. And we are honored to have her as part of our ecosystem to share a little bit more about this particular topic that is so prominent in our communities. So I am not going to read a bio because she can speak for herself and her work speaks volumes. So I'm going to allow her to jump right in, share, and communicate what it is. Please ask questions in the chat if you have them. Also, we will have some time at the end for question and answer. So Dr. Nadia, I'm passing it on to you.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, Joy. I appreciate you so much, and I appreciate the entire Southern Black Girls and Women's Consortium. Y'all have always been in our corner and, been our biggest cheerleaders and supporters. So to be invited here to share today, I am absolutely excited and very grateful to have the opportunity. And hi, everyone who's joining us. I hope you're ready to jump into a different kind of mental health conversation. What I'm going to do really quickly is share my screen and jump right in to the discussion. And if you can let me know in the chat if you're able to see this, you give a thumbs up or just a yes in the chat, then we will be perfect. We will be good to go. So we're going to jump right on in. My name, first of all, I do again want to thank everyone for being here. Let me go ahead and say this off the bat, especially since the pandemic. I've been doing a lot of online teaching. I do a lot of trainings. I'm a professor, all of these things. I have mastered online engagement. I'm gonna just go ahead and just go and shot myself on the shoulder for that. So don't feel like you have to wait. The only way to make this truly interactive is if you go in the chat. And I promise you, I'm probably going to be in real life either typing back or I'm going to stop what I'm saying and respond to a question because I really do like that kind of engagement. So don't hesitate to jump in the chat and don't hesitate to give me emojis and don't hesitate to like or respond to someone else's comment or question in the chat because that's how we get the best level of engagement. And that's how these kind of opportunities and discussions end up being more impactful. So just to jump into a introduction of myself, and let me go ahead and say this too, you're going to get all the glam shot picture today. I can go to the photographer and the makeup artist for nothing, okay? So you're going to get all these glam shot pictures, okay? So my name is Dr. Nadia Richardson. I'm the founder and CEO of the Black Women's Mental Health Institute. I actually, like most phenomenal Black women, wear a lot of hats because I have a lot of passion towards a lot of different things, all of them very people-oriented. So in addition to being the founder and CEO of the Black Women's Mental Health Institute, I'm a diversity and equity and inclusion consultant. So I have a lot of different clients across the country where I go and I help them to really be intentional, not superficial, not, some handsy-pansy, come and have like Taco Tuesday because it's Hispanic, month. Like, no, we're really going to dive in and disrupt this systemic racism and inequity in your organizations and your companies, or I'm not the consultant for you, right? So I do diversity consultant like that. And I'm also an interdisciplinary professor. So I've taught in a lot of different departments, including medicine, biomedical sciences, public health. This summer, I've had the opportunity to teach a program that is a pipeline program for HBCU students who are looking to go into the healthcare field. And then I got to teach one of my faves, which is just Introduction to African American Studies, because I get freshmen and sophomore and people who are excited to be in school. So those are just a few of the things I do. Of course, today we're going to be talking primarily about the Black Women's Mental Health Institute, because believe it or not, all of those things inform the work that I'm doing with the Black Women's Mental Health Institute, as well as some of my own personal perspective, which I will be sharing today. The Black Women's Mental Health Institute is committed to building awareness of and support for the mental and holistic well-being of Black women and girls. We envision a world where Black women and girls can thrive in every dimension. If you go to our website, you'll see a whole diagram of the 8 dimensions of wellness. which means that while we're focusing on maintaining and fostering and building supports for mental health, we understand that mental health does not exist in and of itself. It really is connected to our holistic mental health. And it can not only be supported by seeing a counselor and a psychiatrist, which we are huge advocates of, it has to be supported by the environments which we live, which means that if Black women are truly going to be mentally free, and walk in a space of liberation, we have to address racism, sexism, classism, homophobia, transphobia in all of our spaces and in all of our systems. So even though we're a mental health organization, sometimes you'll find us at a school board meeting if we feel like that school is being inequitable. Sometimes you'll see us meeting with law enforcement. Sometimes you'll see us meeting with healthcare agencies, because it's important for us to make sure that all of those different entities are operating in very equitable manners, because if they don't, it's going to negatively impact our mental health. Not the traditional approach to mental health advocacy, but something I think is very important. We were founded in about 2015, and it was as a result of 3 losses. And all of these losses happened around 2015. It was Karen Washington, who was the founder of For Brown Girls. And for those who may remember her, For Brown Girls was a blog where she talked about colorism. She talked about her own mental health journey. She talked about the representation of Black women in the media. And she talked about bullying because she was teased as a young girl for being so dark-skinned. We also lost Simone Battle and TT Branch. Simone Battle, if some of you may remember her, she was a contestant on the X Factor, that singing show. She did not win, but when the show ended, she joined a girl group, recorded an entire album, and right before they went on tour, she was lost to suicide. And Miss TT Branch, for those who are our naturalistas, up under here is a lot of curly hair. She was the founder of Miss Jessie's hair products. So her and her sister founded that line, became very popular, and she was lost to suicide. At the time of these losses, I had finished my doctorate, and my research was on the lived experiences of Black women with mental health concerns. And so I was already kind of traveling around, sharing the findings of my study, incorporating it into my academic teaching, when all of these losses happened. And because of who they were, they got coverage by, Essence and Ebony, Huffington Post, those kind of things. But I happened to go into the comment sections of a lot of the articles that were posted about them. In the comment sections, you saw a lot of people saying stuff like, well, why were they so weak? What did they have to be sad about? They were very pretty. They were very successful. They had money. They were selfish, all of these things. And I just thought, well, what do they think mental health looks like? And it's because of comments like that oftentimes high achieving, high functioning Black women won't necessarily let individuals know when something's wrong, because their challenges may be dismissed. And I felt like, you know what, this is not acceptable. We really need to be having a different kind of conversation. And one of the reporters who wrote about Karen Washington said, the problem with Karen is that she will always be remembered as a martyr. The challenge is that we don't need anymore. And so when we started our organization, we actually started it under the name No More Martyrs. And I did that because I actually used the concept of martyrdom in my research. And martyrdom is a concept that comes out of Black feminist thought that talks about the ways that Black women and girls are basically socialized to be martyrs in service to everyone else. So they carry their communities on their back. They're going to be the first ones to take care of their families. They're going to be the caregivers. They're going to advance in their careers. They're going to do all of these things, and they won't ask for help because society has really built them up in a way that says Black women are strong, capable, and can do these things on their own. And they're celebrated for those things, which actually takes away from the ability to see them in the full humanness of what they are, because all humans need help and support, and all humans need community. So because Black women are socialized in this way, they essentially martyr themselves in service of everyone else but themselves. And so that's how we came up with the name of our organization. And in 2022, we actually rebranded and relaunched as the Black Women's Mental Health Institute, but kept the name No More Martyrs and now have it as a program, which is the No More Martyrs Sisterhood Collective. And this is where we host direct programs such as our Sister Support Meetup, which takes place on Thursdays. And there's actually one this Thursday that I'll share with you if you'd like to join that conversation later this evening, and a number of other different programs. And I'll whip through just a few of our programs. Our Sister Support Meetups, as I mentioned, is taking place this Thursday. That's a safe space for Black women to get together and just talk about different topics. The topics for this evening is affirmative action and racial battle fatigue. We're going to jump into that conversation this week or this evening. We've had a number of great opportunities over the past several years, including an opportunity to speak at a congressional briefing in Washington, D.C. that was hosted by the Congressional Caucus on Black Women and Girls. And this happened this happened after the loss of Michelle Shirley. This happened actually before the loss of Michelle Shirley. And it led to some advocacy work that we were able to do with that family. We also have the Sisters Speak Suicide Awareness and Prevention Initiative, and we're working on a video storytelling project on this now, where Black women are sharing their experiences with suicidal ideation, suicide attempts, or the loss of a loved one to suicide. And we really want to frame this conversation in a way because oftentimes awareness campaigns around suicide do not fully represent the experiences of Black women, although there's a really great podcast by Takia Blackman that launched recently that said Black women or Black people don't commit suicide. And that's a great podcast. They're out of Washington, D.C. So I encourage you to follow them. And actually, you can stay connected to us too, because we're pulling them in on that project. In 2018, we had the opportunity to travel to Salvador, Brazil, and conduct another video project where we captured the stories of Black women there who are managing their own mental health. And we traveled through Brazil with Vidas Negras Importantem, which is Portuguese for Black Lives Matters. We were able to go to a art show. We went to a ballet. We went to the home of different individuals who we were connected to, and then we got to go into businesses and interview individuals in their business, as well as tour a mental health facility. What you'll find there, which is just an example of how colonization really wreaked havoc across the African diaspora, is the same things that Black Lives Matters is fighting for here in the United States, are the same things that Black Lives Matters is fighting for in Brazil, and it's equitable school systems, equitable healthcare, equitable criminal justice systems, equitable housing, and all of those things impact our mental health and mental well-being. Again, we also did some advocacy with Michelle Shirley. She was a Black woman living in Torrance, California. And she was a mother, a recent law school graduate, and she was a woman who was living with a diagnosis of bipolar. She was also someone who spoke about her experiences and advocated for mental health, but she went into mental health distress behind the wheel of a car. And law enforcement actually interpreted her behavior as combative and opened fire versus getting her help. So she was lost in that incident. And we had the opportunity to speak with her legal team, speak with her family members, and they of course, they filed charges. Their question for law enforcement was, why shoot first? Why shoot first? We became very passionate about this particular case because a similar incident happened in South Carolina with a white woman, and she was not shot. As a matter of fact, she used her vehicle to ram law enforcement vehicles, multiple law enforcement vehicles that attempted to assist her. Then she spanned donuts, ran herself into a ditch, and even then, law enforcement was able to go down into the ditch, pull her out, and take her to jail, and then eventually into an institution. You can see the differences, right? If Michelle Shirley had been given an ounce of that patience and that consideration, she would still be alive, and that was not the case. We have been fortunate to do a lot of different work. We've traveled to Washington, D.C. Actually several times now. And then I am actually in Birmingham, Alabama, which is where we are founded and headquartered. And it's also the home of Angela Davis. So we've had a number of opportunities now to meet with her, talk about how rest is revolutionary, talk about how social justice is necessary in order for Black people to truly be mentally well and liberated. And so we've had the opportunity to celebrate her. My very first time meeting her is just one of my favorite memories. I was sitting in a house. She was on the bed, sitting on the bed, and I was sitting Indian style at her feet. And there was only one other person in the room, which was a photographer who was taking pictures. And I was just able to talk to her about her life and the movement, and about mental health and her thoughts on it. And she shared all of those things, including why she believes that prisons should be abolished, and how prisons are connected to mental health. We do a lot of speaking, so this kind of space is fun to me. I actually really enjoy it. We've done South by Southwest, which was fantastic. We did that with Lauren Carson, who is with Black Girls Smiles, which is another fantastic organization that's out of Atlanta and has been also supported by the Southern Black Girls and Women's Consortium. We've done work with the American Medical Association, the American Psychological Association. We host our own conference every July, which it took place a couple of weeks ago, which is the Mental Health Equity and Liberation Summit. And we do it in July because the US Senate designated July as the Minority Mental Health Awareness Month. We don't use the name minority anymore. So for us, we call it Mental Health Equity and Liberation Month. And we're going to keep speaking throughout the year. So we are speaking next week at the National Association for Black Journalists National Convention. And then in September, we're traveling to speak at the State of Black Mental Health, which is an annual event that is hosted by the Center for Black Health and Equity. All right. That was a lot, right? That was just the introduction. That is not even what we're going to be focusing on today. What I want us to focus on today is going to require us to take a deep breath, right? Because what we're going to talk about today is holding space, right? Holding space for ourselves, holding space for others. This is going to require us to be present with each other, mentally, physically. We're already kind of physically, digitally present with each other, but also patient with ourselves, to center ourselves, to be very honest about the feelings that may arise during the conversation we're going to have today. And I want you to be thinking about everything you ever thought you knew about mental health, everything you do know about mental health, and then insert yourself into that conversation. Because that's actually something that I did and put me into a different place in regards to my own mental health journey. I've studied it academically, but I'm also going to share a little bit about how this impacts my family directly. So I want us to take a deep breath. You can hear all these things I'm about to throw at you really quick. And then I want us to just talk about it. Just talk about how this feels and what you feel like it means to you. So we've heard many, many times the statistics around mental health. Nearly 7 million Black individuals in the United States live with a diagnosable mental health or mental illness, right? It's even despite that, there's still so much stigma associated with it. And there's a number of reasons why. We've heard the distrust. What I've often said is that distrust is warranted and justifiable considering how Black individuals in the United States have been discriminated against in regards to the healthcare system then and now. We're seeing it very presently. There's also a lack of diverse practitioners who focus on mental health. The numbers that we as an organization are looking to support and increase is that it's 2% psychiatrists, 4% psychologists, roughly 7% licensed marriage and family therapists, and roughly 11% licensed professional counselors who are Black in this country. And so a big part of what our organization does is we actually have an internship program where we support Black students in completing internship hours and practicum hours towards full licensure. That's a program that we started last September and is really taken off. And I'm very proud of the young women that we've been able to support in that space. We also know a lack of insurance a lack of research relevant data related to Black mental health. You'll find oftentimes that when healthcare industries are talking about consistent care, that those guidelines are not representative of Black experiences, partly because there's not enough Black participation in research studies, and that goes back to distrust. If Black people are distrustful of the healthcare system, then they are absolutely not going to participate in studies unless they feel like it's safe. We also know that law enforcement criminalizes Black mental health in Black populations more than white populations. So much so that a study came out some years ago that said if you're Black or brown and you go into mental distress, you are actually advised to not call law enforcement because you're much more likely to die versus a white counterpart. So we know all of these things, and we also know, because it's criminalized, that most Black people more Black people are incarcerated because of mental health than, again, their white counterparts. And the research it keeps coming up. Right before we shut down for the pandemic, we saw an uptick in suicide in Black youth. And so it led the Congressional Black Caucus to do an entire study and write a report about the crisis of Black suicide. And guess what? As with basically the entire population, it went up during and after the pandemic. So these are studies and real numbers that we're living in. And a big part of understanding this is to change the conversation that I often see having, which is about the difference between mental health and mental illness. These words are often used interchangeably. And because of that, stigma persists, right? So I do want us to take a moment, and when I'm talking about this, really consider that the conversation I'm having around mental health is for all of us, right? Mental health is literally a state of well-being. It is optimum care. It's when someone is able to realize and cope and manage the normal stresses of life. It means that you can go about the ups and downs of life. Mental health does not mean that you're going to be happy all the time. That is not human. It is not natural. It's not even healthy, right? It does mean that life is going to hit you sometimes and you'll get sad. Sad is okay. Tears are natural and normal. It does mean that you're going to have a human response sometimes. And so you might get angry. Absolutely natural, absolutely normal. So mental health is literally a state of being. It's living life and being able to have the capacity to live it in a healthy way and manage life's ups and downs. It doesn't go into the space of being a diagnosable mental illness until it negatively impacts your ability to go about your life. In clinical terms, oftentimes it's does your depression or anxiety persist beyond 2 weeks? Some are saying now 3 and 4 weeks, but 2 weeks is the general consensus. Does it impact your ability to go about your life? Are you calling into work every day? Are you not engaging family and friends? Are you not eating? Are you utilizing a maladaptive coping mechanism like alcohol or some kind of a substance? Is it damaging your relationships with loved ones? Are you noticing your house getting really messy? Are you noticing that maybe you're not bathing? When your life is impacted in those ways, it's a diagnosable mental illness, and you should be able to get help for that. Because these are used interchangeably, a lot of times people will say, oh, the mental health conversation doesn't have anything to do with me. The best example I can give is heart health, right? Everyone should be concerned about their health. You should exercise, you should eat healthy, you should drink water, you should get rest, all of those things. But if you don't, you may develop some kind of heart disease. Same thing with, high blood pressure. Everyone should be eating healthy, right? If you indulge sometimes, it's okay. We all do it, but you want to maintain your health and well-being. But if you don't, you might find yourself in the space of managing an illness. You may be managing hypertension. You may be managing diabetes. You may be managing all of these things. Mental health is the same way. Everyone should be concerned about maintaining their mental health and well-being. But if you're not, you can get into the space of diagnosis. Also, another good example is that sometimes mental illness is hereditary, right? So I know individuals who are hypertensive and who are diabetic, but it runs in their family. Mental health, again, is the same thing. Whereas everyone should be concerned about their mental health, They should also be knowledgeable about whether or not mental illness runs in their family. So they could be mindful of it and looking out for it. And I'll talk a little bit about that. But this lack of understanding and using these things interchangeably is what contributes to the persistence of stigma. Now, when we're talking about mental health in the Black community, I already shared those numbers. I already shared those statistics. What's often not discussed is something outside of the medical model of mental health, right? I had the opportunity last week, and I'm still processing this experience, but I was invited to give a conversation on generational trauma to a group of surviving foot soldiers of the civil rights movement. So here I am in a room with individuals who, as children, marched in those black and white videos that everyone has seen. Some of them went to jail. Some of them lost loved ones. Some of them had KKK targeting their houses. And what I found in this space and having this conversation with them is that this happened so many years ago, but it still brought tears, right? And having the conversation, there was a lot of pride in the work that they did, but also a lot of unaddressed trauma. And they also said present day social and political climates are making them feel like maybe some of what they were able to accomplish didn't matter. So there were feelings of hopelessness and helplessness. When it comes to Black mental health, because of the history of this country and the ways in which Black communities and Black individuals and Black families have historically been treated in this country, and really around the world, but I'm speaking specifically about the United States, mental health is often impacted in a way where trauma is a part of our heritage. And that's unfortunate, especially when that trauma is not acknowledged and recognized, right? So that we can get the supports we need for them. So of course, generational trauma, I'm going to whip through this because this is looking very professory, right? So I'm going to whip through these definitions, but I feel like it's important. Generational trauma and intergenerational, some people use that term too, is just trauma that is passed from decades, right? How many of us have heard about post-traumatic stress syndrome, right? Or Joy DeGruy's research on how that looks in, descendants of slaves, right? When we're thinking about this research actually comes out of data that says that kind of trauma can become embedded into your DNA and passed down from generations to generations. The same was found in survivors of the Holocaust, that trauma of that extent becomes embedded into your DNA and passed from generation to generation. What contributes to individuals not necessarily being able to manage the trauma is racism, ongoing racism and ongoing exposure to trauma. And so this was a part of the conversation I had with this group, is that systemic and structural racism are really creating environments where individuals are not able to thrive. And then vicarious drama or trauma being something that elicits the same kind of feelings, right? I'm not going to go through these entire definitions, but I encourage you to think about these things as we're talking about mental health. And for those who might not be familiar with vicarious trauma is just a trauma that did not happen to you, but elicits a similar emotional expression from you, right? One of the best examples I can give was Sandra Bland. Sandra Bland hit me in a way where I just felt like it could have been anyone I knew, right? We will never know the full extent of what happened that day or what her experiences were, but how many of you have been pulled over by a law enforcement officer, right? And you've had the talk, you know how to behave, you know, the talk even, let me tell you what, the talk, how many of you know what I mean when I say the talk? The talk is, okay, I see raised hands, right? The talk is, Black parents, Black mothers, Black fathers having the conversation of how you behave when you're in particular environments because of your race so that you can remain safe. The talk is a trauma response, because the main reason parents are having those conversations and you get taught these things at a young age is out of fear. It's out of fear. fear that my child might not come home, fear that I might engage someone who doesn't see me for the fullness of who I am, but sees me only for the color of my skin. Sandra Bland was that. And here's the thing, I've been pulled over. I'm not saying that I speed a lot, but I've been pulled over for more than once, right? And sometimes I'm there. Sometimes they get full Nadia Richardson, right? I'm here. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. No, sir. No, ma'am. And every once in a while they get the, "Not what you pull me over for. You know, I was not even going that fast." Like, and I wondered when Sandra Bland happened, did they catch her on a bad day? And then I internalized, what if I came across the wrong officer when they caught me on the wrong day? That's vicarious trauma, right? This fear, the emotional response. Same thing with Michelle Shirley, the young lady that I mentioned. She was a law school graduate. And the fact that she was someone who was high functioning, but still managing something, the fact that she was able to acquire educational degrees, the fact that I felt like our lives were very similar, but she was still considered a threat because she had a bad moment, brought fear, right? So vicarious drama is very similar in that way. When we're thinking about this in the context of the Black community, oftentimes we don't get an opportunity to catch our breath, right? We know the history. We know about shackled slavery, even though some states are denying that this is even a thing, and denying young people the opportunity to learn about these things in school systems as they should be, and stripping our history from the curriculum as it should be, as it should not be. But we know about shackled slavery. We know about Jim Crow. We know that we lived in a space that was separate but equal. That's the past, right? And oftentimes you hear people say, well, that's the past. Slavery was 300 years ago. You were never a slave. Segregation was in the 50s and 60s, which, by the way, is not that long ago. It's just one generation ago, but okay. But we can't even get a chance to recover because the systems that we operate in are still so inequitable, right? We know about gerrymandering, and we know about having to redraw district lines so that we have the ability to vote. We know that Black mothers and maternal mortality rates are extremely high amongst Black women. All of these things are a result of systemic and structural racism. And then we even know the impact of affirmative action and the role that that has played. And now I've heard different debates about whether it was good or bad to strip it. But here's the thing, regardless of how you feel, to strip it and not have anything to be put in its place denies the fact that Black students are still disadvantaged when it comes to getting in these types of institutions. And to deny that is to truly deny the systemic and structural racism that exists even within institutions of higher education. So these are important conversations to have. These obviously are very good examples of vicarious trauma. At the height of the Black Lives Matter movement, what we experienced as an organization was an uptick in individuals reaching out to us who were depressed, anxious, scared, feeling hopeless. They had a lot of concern for their loved ones. They felt like, how can I keep my family safe? They had a lot of concerns about being in the United States. Why doesn't my country love me? Why doesn't my country protect me? They had a lot of stressors in going into their workplaces, especially if they were the only person of color in that workspace and were being questioned by colleagues and supervisors and asked to either speak on behalf of the entire Black community, or being presented with questions like, well, I don't see what people are so mad about. I mean, obviously these people are doing something. Breonna Taylor shouldn't have been in that house for her boyfriend. What did Sandra Bland do? Couldn't have George Floyd just complied, right? And then the question, the young lady in the middle is Ebony Wilkerson. She actually is still alive, but we use her in our storytelling because she was a Black woman who drove her. Okay, let's give the full backstory. She drove her children into the ocean in California. And some of you may remember this in the news, the image of her driving this van into the ocean, other people on the beach, running to the car, pulling her and the children out. That's the story. That was the news clip. That was it. woman, mother, and so if you go into the comment sections now, everybody's, she's horrible. She should never get her children back. What kind of mother is she? Some people should just never have kids. Da 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 da. And all you saw was her picture, her mugshot, and her mugshot, she looked vacant. She was disheveled, all of these things. And that was the image that was presented of her. The other side of the story is that at the very moment she was driving her van into the ocean, her sister was on the phone with 911. And she was like, I need to find my sister. I can't find her. I think she's gone after the children. And I don't understand why the hospital let her go. Right? So when we're talking about the healthcare system and systemic and structural racism in the healthcare system, somehow Ebony Wilkerson, even though she was in full psychosis, was let go. It was determined that she was fine and she was let go. And so not being able to provide her with the appropriate care, she, in a disillusioned state, it did what she did. And here's another thing. She's a nurse. So for someone who worked in the healthcare industry, it didn't matter that she had that degree. It didn't matter that she had that profession. It didn't matter when she went into psychosis. The interpretation was, is this Black woman doesn't need our care, let her go. So that's a whole story that we don't get to share. And this picture that I had to go search for was not the picture that was presented in the news. It was the picture of her mugshot and then later on her court proceedings. I had to search for this picture so I could figure out the humanness of this woman's story. Vicarious trauma, again, it keeps happening, right? And again, when I'm thinking about the experiences of talking with this group of foot soldiers, again, individuals who had gone to jail, who had marched, they talked about stories like Cleo. This day and age where a young man can go knock on the wrong door and be shot. And what they said for them is it's nothing new under the sun, right? That Cleo, that Trayvon Martin, for all of them were Emmett Till. And to give just some context, because when you see black and white videos or pictures of Emmett Till, when you see him in his casket, it does make it seem, if you don't know the fullest historical context, like this was years ago, Emmett Till would still be alive, likely, right? This wasn't someone who was killed in the, however long ago. It was someone who, by all means, the individuals that I spoke to last Saturday didn't know him, but were alive at the same time with him. You know what I'm saying? So when we're talking about vicarious trauma and navigating these things, a big part of why it's so difficult to navigate it is that you can't catch your breath. When one incident passes, another happens. When one incident passes, another happens. And this is, not to just, go off of George Floyd and I can't breathe, but you become really disillusioned at times. And it negatively impacts your mental health and your holistic health, right? It does impact your body as regards to inflammation. It impacts your heart. It impacts your blood pressure, impacts all of these things. And it does take a toll in regards to your mental health, your depression, anxiety, psychosis, sleeping disorders. At the height of Black Lives Matters movement, we started losing a lot of Black Lives Matters individuals to suicide. And that's because oftentimes when you're battling these types of things and you're not taking care of yourself, and you're not getting the support you need, it's easy to succumb to the stress of fighting, right? For your full humanness. We also know that when it comes to police shooting videos, I never watched the police shooting videos, by the way. I can't bring myself to do it. And actually at the time when there were so many, we actually started promoting this concept that you don't have to watch to be woke, because we know now that making yourselves available. Yeah, Linda, I couldn't, I can't watch them at all. We know now, based on research, that the more you watch those videos, the more you're likely to start exhibiting symptoms that are along the lines of PTSD, right? Because no human should constantly be inundated with images of violence and of death, and not in those ways. And so again, with the height of the Black Lives Matters movement, we saw that those videos were negatively impacting the mental health of Black individuals. Now, when we're also thinking about mental health, I always go back to the history of it, right? And the fact is, the founding father of mental health and specifically psychiatry in this country, which is Benjamin Rush, didn't believe in Black people, right? He actually, if you look him up, he's listed as an abolitionist, someone who fought to end slavery. But the reason he fought in that way, even though he owned slaves and eventually let them go, is because he didn't believe Black people were Black. He believed that they were white people with a form of leprosy. And so thank you for that, Joy, with a form of leprosy. And because of that, he felt like they weren't Black, they needed a cure. And he trained individuals like, I know, Linda, he trained individuals like Samuel Cartwright, who came up with the diagnosis of drapetomania, which was a diagnosis that said a slave who ran away from his master had to be insane. There were also diagnoses like the protest psychosis, which essentially said members of the Black Lives Matters party exhibited symptoms that were almost like schizophrenia. And so because of that, a lot of individuals who are part of Black Lives Matters movement didn't go, or Black Panther Party did not go to jail. They went to, mental health institutions. So being mindful of all these things and the fact that this similar history is informing a lot of how patients are treated and is just now being acknowledged by the American Psychological Association, who is just now admitting that racism is built into the system, and the American Psychiatric Association that just in 2015 removed the founding father Benjamin Rush from their logo. They're just now acknowledging this. Now it's not showing up in curriculum just yet, but at least it's being acknowledged. This is why our organization believes in social justice, disruptive justice, and healing justice. It's not just enough to get someone connected to a counselor, which we do. We provide free counseling, roughly 100 hours every month. Actually, I'm sorry, roughly 200 hours every month to Black women throughout the state of Alabama. And now we're looking to expand to Georgia, Mississippi, Texas, and Florida. We believe that access to care is important, but justice and equity is important, creating environments that maintain our mental health. When it comes to Black women, strength is also a barrier that we have to overcome within our mental health. And we need to be able to do this with an understanding that the reason Black women are seen as strong is because there are so many inequities that we constantly have to persevere against. And this idea of strength that's been promoted is something that normalizes our distress. How many times have you heard a single mother who's raising multiple kids say, oh, she's so strong, oh, she's so able to do this, without saying, why can't we remove the barriers that exist in making sure that her kids have equitable access to food, so we don't have food deserts, equitable access to education, so we don't have underfunded schools, equitable access to all these things. We don't address those things. We focus on the fact that a woman has to persevere through those things, and we call her strong. But that strength, again, is a response to constant attacks on her personhood. And we celebrate these stories, right? We celebrate them in our media. We celebrate them even in regards to our forefathers, right? But you can even see with Annie Lou Hamer, like, there are tears. What we often don't tell are the stories of the emotional barriers and challenges that existed in those times. We celebrate our ancestors for persevering through slavery. We never talk about the ones who went mad in slavery. A great book, and this is an author that I've had the opportunity to meet and work with a couple of times, is Behind the Mask of the Strong Black Woman. I highly recommend that you read it, because what she says is that telling the story of strength is just one dimension of a Black woman's story. Telling the other dimension is talking about how she suffers and has suffered and was able to navigate that suffering. And a big part of this and being able to do this is kind of what I wanted us to do today, which is the power of storytelling, right? Making sure that we are articulating the trueness of ourselves. I'll use myself as an example. My name is Dr. Richardson. I gave you that really big, fancy introduction of who I am and all the things that I'm doing. When I walk into a room now, that's what people expect. What they don't necessarily know about me, unless I share, is that I'm a Black woman who's living with high functioning, rapid cycling bipolar 2. And what they also don't know is that it took me years to get diagnosed, because I had to, one, overcome my own stigma. Two, I actually attributed my challenges to my personality. I felt like, oh, sure, I might not sleep for a day or two, but that's because I'm a busybody and I like to be doing all of these things, right? Or, yeah, I might not get out of bed for a day or two, but I'm just tired. I do a lot of things, right? It wasn't until I got 3 clinicians who happened to all 3 be Black women, and I gave them all permission to speak to each other. And this is my internal medicine doctor who did my physicals every year, a counselor who was recommended to me by a school professor, and then a psychiatrist, which the counselors recommended me to. When I gave all 3 of them permission to speak to each other, they all came back and they were like, how did this chick not know she's living with bipolar? Like, how is she almost like in her mid to late 30s? And how she not know? Like, how did she not know this? Here's another thing too. For a good part of my life, especially when I was younger, I didn't have insurance. So if I'm not going in for preventative care, what makes you think I'm going to go talk to someone about my feelings? It wasn't until community came and pulled me in. Yes, Linda, collaborative care. We don't empower our community to do those things. And oftentimes our community doesn't even know that it's allowed, right? They don't know that they can give their caregiver or healthcare professionals permission to speak to each other. For me, it was a game changer. When they were able to speak to each other and create a treatment plan for myself, I can honestly say my life has never been the same. So that's the storytelling part, the healing power of storytelling. I wouldn't want anyone to look at me with my glam shots, like I shared earlier, and say, oh my gosh, she's career goals. It's almost like, relationship goals. You look at someone that's like, oh, their relationship goals, but you don't know how toxic that relationship is. Like, we need to tell the real stories of who we are. I struggle. I had loved ones who still don't necessarily embrace my diagnosis. I've lost friends. I left my full-time job partly because I wanted to run the nonprofit full-time, which I love, which I should have been doing all along, but also because I was in racist environments, toxic environments that didn't believe in acknowledging my efforts, questioned my qualifications, did all of these things. And so here I am trying to persevere in a toxic environment. And I was like, I can't do this, right? And I, as someone who's been living with bipolar all my life and didn't know it, now understand I was never meant to be in a 9-to-5. When I was in my 20s trying to do a 9-to-5, I felt like I was dying every single day because my mind doesn't work like that. First of all, I'm not going to be able to sit still. And guess what? I wasn't that kind of student either. But no teacher saw that, right? They saw this busybody girl who can't sit still, who's not paying attention in class, But my mind doesn't work like that. That's not how I function. Now that I'm living in the fullness of who I am, I'm more successful than I ever thought I would be outside of the parameters of what I was taught I should be doing. I was taught that I should work a 9-to-5. I was taught to do these things. Once I started walking the fullness of who I was, I became healthy. This is why storytelling is important. Oftentimes people look at the end product and they don't look at and understand the fullness of the journey, and they never will be able to do that if we don't share those stories. So just to conclude, there's ways that we can speak truth to power. Generational silence, guess what? I didn't know that I was living with this diagnosis until I was 30, and I didn't know until I was 30 that it ran in my family because we didn't discuss it, right? I didn't know my father was managing this. I didn't know his father managed certain other things. No, I didn't know. But we should have those conversations. If diabetes runs in your family and heart disease runs in your family, chances are you know, or someone would have told you don't eat that, be on the lookout for this, whatever. We stay silent about things related to mental health. We need to pay attention to overachievers. I was always achieving. I was always doing all of these things. And so no one really expressed concern for me because why? She's fine. Nadia's successful. Prayer over Prozac. I live in the Bible Belt, right? I'm in the South. My grandfather was a preacher. My family's actually from Jamaica, but he was a preacher from Cuba. I have this strong faith foundation, but faith foundations alone are not going to sustain you. Instead, you should find a treatment plan and incorporate your faith foundation into those treatment plans. Unaddressed trauma, kind of even what I mentioned about the vicarious trauma and the generational trauma. This idea of having to prove yourself to what? I promise you, at 44 years old, I'm not proving anything to antipati, right? I'm not doing it. I know who I am and I don't have to prove it to you or anyone. I wasn't like that when I was in my 20s. In my 20s, I was in environments where I was questioned and my capabilities were questioned. What I was bringing to the table was questioned. And I felt like I had to prove myself. Well, I'm the only Black kid in this class. I'm the only Black person in here. I'm gonna no. Just because you are interpreting the fact that this Black woman can't do certain things doesn't mean this Black woman needs to break her back trying to prove to you that she can. I'm just gonna show and move in and of myself and for myself. I'm not going to keep myself silent because it's going to murder my spirit. There is no such thing as Superman or Superwoman. I wanted so badly to be Claire Huxtable and have 5 kids. I have one beautiful daughter, one and done, and I'm very happy with that decision. And we need to get outside, right? And we need to self-advocate and make time. Don't say who has the time, make the time. I have a ton of work today, but when I log off this call, I'm getting in the car and I'm taking my daughter to an amusement park in Pigeon Forge, right? I'll have my laptop that I'll work on tonight when she's sleeping and maybe tomorrow, but I'm going to make time for her. I'm going to make time for myself. We're going to go swimming. We're going to have a good time. You can do that unapologetically, and you have to do that because resistance requires rest, and there's still so much work to do. I'll end, as I often do, with this quote that just about everyone knows from Audre Lorde, but will always remain relevant. If I didn't define myself for myself, I would be crunched into other people's fantasies for me and eaten alive. I want us to tell the fullness of our stories because that's good for our mental health. I want us to hold space for ourselves and for others because it's good for our mental health. And I want us to resist racism in all its forms, sexism in all its forms, because it's good for our mental health. And I'm going to wrap if there are any questions. I do want to extend the invitation for you to join us today. If you're available this evening, it's this evening at 6 p.m. Central Standard Time. We're going to have a conversation about affirmative action and racial battle fatigue. And, get to know us. You can scan our code, visit our website. We've got events all the time. We've got some really exciting things brewing for the rest of 2023 and into 2024. And so I'll stop. Joy, thank you so much. Y'all, I could do this all day, every day, right? Like I can say
it's your passion. It's your purpose. We appreciate you pouring into us during this time. And I'm sure that the ladies that are on the call thoroughly enjoyed your presentation and your insight and your truth telling, right? Somebody told me to stop saying storytelling for Black folks because it is lived experiences. We're not making up fantasies and fables. And so it hit me differently because, when we're telling our stories, people can assume, oh, that's a fable. That's not a myth. This is what's happening to Black girls and Black women. So just very, I am very grateful for you in this space today. And I'm grateful for all of those that have joined us today. Thank you so much for your participation and your willingness to learn something new and learn about a phenomenal organization with the Black Women's Mental Health Institute. We do this Sage Circle thing every month on the 4th Thursday of the month at 1 o'clock Eastern Standard, 12 Central Time. We'd love to have you join us next month where we will have another subject matter expert from our community of Black women that will share some things with you. So I want you to have your time. I do not want to go over. I want to be really intentional, but I do want to say we have a few more minutes. So if anybody did have any questions, wanted to make sure that we were able to do that. You could type it or you could come off of mute and ask Dr. Nadia.
Thank you so much for joining. I see somebody asked for the website, so I put the website in the chat. And if there are any other questions, or like Joy just shared, you can unmute. Thank you. Thank you, Keisha.
Yes, it was very, very insightful and provided a lot of information, things and connected the dots. So I appreciate you all. If there are no questions, I will let you have 3 minutes because we are Black women and we are very busy. So, get a bathroom break before your next meeting, before you have to go get the kids, all the things that we have to do and juggle. We appreciate your time and we look forward to seeing you next month for the next Sage Circle. Thank you.
Thank you.